discovering and managing that data is very, very hard. It becomes even harder over time. And why is that? Because we're generating more and more data, right? Microsoft have this 7-year-old mantra of data is exploding. I think now it should be your budget is exploding, but I think the message is still relevant. And IT really struggle in organizations to keep up with the amount of data that's being created, whether it's from information workers, line of business applications, IoT devices, and think of all the other systems that you're having to manage as well on premises. What we're going to do over the next hour or so is, I'm not a huge fan of slides, but I've just got a couple of slides kind of to scene set what we're going to show here. And Sarah showed this very briefly, and I've expanded on it slightly, around the 4 pillars that we have from a compliance perspective in Office 365. So for example, when we're trying to find that data, we're using that information governance and protection capabilities to add automation into that solution. As in, you're not burdening those end users having to manually label things or discover data or put information in the right folder in order for it to be classified and protected correctly. So taking that away from those end users, but having that governance set up automatically to discover that data, whether it resides in Office 365, whether it's in Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, equally at the endpoint. I'll show some DLP capabilities that are built into Windows 10, as to Sarah's comment earlier, and on premises as well. So if you're still using file servers today, or if you've got SharePoint 2010 upwards, we can discover and protect data there as well. And what's in preview at the moment is another solution that I'll cover at the very end called Azure Purview. So if you have SQL servers on premises, or you're migrating data up to non-Microsoft applications like AWS, or you're putting data into Azure containers, or Azure files, then we can also monitor and protect that data up there as well. Because now we know where that data is, we can utilize things like insider risk management. So not just looking at the data of what's classified and who's using it, but also the behavior changes for those end users. So if Sarah, for example, decides to hand in a notice tomorrow, and she's trying to embezzle as much information away from that organization as she can and takes it to her next place, we can see that behavior change. And I'll show you what that looks like. And at the very last, over on the right-hand side here, is about discovering the respond. So this is after the fact. We've done our proactive protections and our monitoring of our data, but really trying to find out the content for either DSR, so data subject requests, internal cases, being able to just do things easier from a freedom of information request coming in. How can we do our whole review process within these tools and just export if we need to? We want to mitigate that as much as possible, or negate that from actually exporting our corporate data out. So how can we do that more efficiently? And then lastly, around being able to audit that content. Everything in Office 365 is audited at a very granular level. So we have something called advanced audit. Now we can look at different activities from a Microsoft Teams perspective, or if somebody's trying to search for something that they shouldn't really know about, we can build up a timeline of events about when that particular thing happened for those individual users. It sounds scary, but if you think about it from a compliance perspective, we want this balance between security and compliance and productivity, especially with everyone working at home at the moment. They are stressed as well. You know, sometimes things are unintentional. So they might be stressed sending things out when they didn't mean to. So it's just building up that timeline of events, being alerted to the fact that that has happened, and then maybe having a conversation with those individuals. And right down the bottom here, which we're going to go into in a second, is around our compliance manager and compliance score. Over the last couple of years, customers have asked me, now, where do we start with all this stuff? What do we turn on? Because there's so much. Now we have built into the solution here is around compliance score. We have productivity score and we have compliance score. This is a great place to be able to input the assessments or the regulations that you need to adhere to. And you can have a dashboard a bit like this, where you can see your compliance score over time. And then we can choose what assessments we're interested in. So with things like NIST or ISO 27001 or GDPR, then we can add those assessments into the solution and then see what the improvement actions need to be in order to manage, understand those controls, but also give evidence about how you as an organization are meeting those controls as well. Equally, if there are assessments that Microsoft provided, and we have 150 of these premium assessments within the platform, is you will see what Microsoft is doing as a platform perspective about how we're meeting those controls. So think of this as a living document. So things change over time, they're never going to be static, but we can use this as a central place to have evidence or reevaluate whether we need to turn things on or off, or edit those controls to meet that sort of compliance. There are lots of different dashboards within here. But equally, we need to understand not just knowing your data and making sure that you're meeting those assessments, but also protecting that content. So this is where our information governance, our compliance, and security all bleed into one. Now we know what that data is, we can protect it. We can prevent oversharing of that content as well. So using data loss prevention policies to understand where that data resides, who's using it, and whether things are unintentionally or intentionally leaving the organization or across boundaries of sensitive information inside your business as well. And lastly, and Sarah touched on this as well, around governing the data. I know within financial industries, having data on premises today was really hard to do anything with. There was just so much of it. And lots of my customers, when we're talking about moving their data up into Office 365, having those retention policies set up, as in we're not keeping information forever. They go into disposition. So we can review what is about to be deleted from the platform. We can have that defensively deleted and have reports around that. And we can also decide to keep information longer if we wanted to as well. So we can relabel that content, or we can keep that content on that label for longer as well. So enough around slides. Let's show you what this looks like in practice. So this is the compliance manager I just talked about. If we click on assessments, I can see the assessments I've picked up within my tenant here. So I'm looking at NIST and I'm looking at data protection. But also we can go into the 150 premium templates that we have. So if we're looking at things like GDPR, then we can bring that assessment up, include that this is something that we're interested in, and then we can review all the different improvement actions that make up that regulation. So if I choose one in here, for example, we can see at a glance around the different assessments that we're interested in and a bit of a description about what that means from a compliance and a security perspective. We also provide you an idea about how you should implement these. Again, it depends on you about how you want to implement this control and to who. Although you can say, right, I meet this compliance, it's who are your users that you're actually protecting or adding this control to. But we also give you a place where you can manage your own documentation, your evidence to the fact that this is set up, and this is how it's set up in order to meet those individual controls. And I'm going through this at pace because there's some very, very cool functions and features within our tool set that is going to give you kind of a taster for today, but feel free to reach out to either Microsoft or Epic to have a deeper dive, a more personal view of what we can do within the platform. You'll see I'm in the new compliance center within here as well. If I go across to the data classifications tab, we can see at a glance about what the types of information I have both online, so within the core repositories of Exchange Online and SharePoint. That's where predominantly most of the information is stored. If you didn't know already, OneDrive for Business is part of SharePoint. It's commonly unknown for some reason, but this scan is set up by default. I haven't had to go in and set this up, so I can see at a glance about how many debit card numbers I have in my environment, how many credit card numbers, how many international classification of diseases do I have. So this is using the built-in sensitive information types. So we have 100 or over 100 now built-in sensitive information types that you can choose from. You can also create your own custom sensitive information types as well, based on keywords or regex or even an exact data match. As in, if you already have numbers or project codes or project names that you're using internally today, you can upload that into the system and automatically detect and protect against that information. Over on the right-hand side, we can see top level sensitivity labels and retention labels are being used in my organization. And then a very high level underneath those about where the bulk of that information is stored. And lastly, over the right-hand side, what we're starting to work on now is being able to surface the information up using our Azure Information Protection scanner. So when that scanner is running on file shares or SharePoint on premises today, we can surface all of that reporting information up into this single environment. And you'll be able to start to see that on the left-hand side here. Skipping a couple of these for a second, but although it's great to understand at a high level what types of information we have, the hard bit then is knowing where that data sits and how much of that information we have. So if I just scroll these categories up, we can see between the built-in sensitive information types, the sensitivity labels we've got set up in our organization, and the retention labels. And if we just expand these again, I can see from these particular labels where those files reside. And if I have appropriate rights to this, because they have to be set up, that nobody gets access by default, I can drill down into these repositories and get a preview of all of the items that contain that specific label, or all of the items that contain credit card information, because maybe we're not PCI compliant. So why are we holding credit card information, you know? And we traditionally, how that was done in the past was either running an eDiscovery search or going directly to Exchange or SharePoint and running searches based on that information. But now we can see this in one central place. We can even see what the platform has automatically scanned for within here. So the system's given this particular document a 55% confidence level that it contains classification of diseases. And again, if I have the appropriate rights, I can double click on those items to get a preview of that document as well. Now you'll have to bear with me, this is all live demo. So we're a little bit slow today, but we'll be able to see a preview of that content. We can also see metadata associated with that item as well. So we can see the header information. Okay, if we scroll back up to the top here. I'll just slightly refresh the screen a second. We also want to see the activities of our data. So where Sarah said before, we need to know not just on an online platform, but across where the data is, regardless of where it is. And when we go into the Activity Explorer, we can see the data visualizations about what's happening on a day-to-day basis. So if I hover over these data visualizations, you can see on this particular day, like 2,000 items were created, 2 were trying to be put into a disallowed app, so an unsanctioned application. There was files modified. There was some data loss prevention policies that have been matched, files being copied to a clipboard or printed, or even copied to USB. So we get a high level view of this. And if I just turn off this data visualization, this is where I can see the kind of verbatim audit logs. So like I said, that information is being ordered at a very granular level. So we can see if we just pick up one of these for a second about not just what the activity is, but when it happened, by who, what was the enforcement, you know, what did the end user see? And I'll show you what the end user gets in a second. So this instance, they were blocked. This was the particular user. The system automatically scanned that content. Now this is outside of the compliance scans that, the compliance labeling that you can do. The system's automatically picked up there's at least one instance of a credit card or a debit card number within that. The DLP policy that was matched. And right at the end, you'll see that the match of the file, this is the full file path here, was actually on someone's PC. It didn't reside in the cloud, and it didn't reside on premises on your file server either. The end user was creating content that was deemed as sensitive on that Windows 10 machine. And also we can see the applications that it was trying to be shared through as well. So there's quite a lot of information within there. Also, you can view the full list of the sensitive information types within here. You can also create your own. So they're all regionalized. So if you're looking at GDPR specific information, we have a template for that. If you're looking for UK specific or US specific templates around financial information or PII information, again, those are all built in. And the new kid on the block is this trainable classifiers. So think of this as machine learning models, which is a great name, right? But think of it more simply as we can train the system about what our contracts look like. So everyone in every organization is going to have a contract of some sort. But ours looks unique to everyone else's. So we can say to the trainable classifier system, hey, this is where predominantly all of my contracts are. Go and have a look at the similarities between all of those and come back and tell me what you believe looks like a contract and what doesn't. So what we're doing is we can go back in, we can review that system if we go in here. It's started. So in this instance, we've looked at over 2,000 files so far. Now I can go in and review all of those items and see the system deemed it as relevant or not relevant. And me, with a human eye, I can check whether those are right or not. And it'll look at that whole model and then fine tune itself so we get the accuracy very high. So if you see that model again as something that looks like a contract, then automatically apply either a data loss prevention policy or retention policy or sensitivity label. This is our discovery method that we can find and fine tune with different types of data. We also announced back at Ignite another solution we have that I'm not going to have a chance to show today, but it's pretty cool, is around SharePoint syntax. So that's a machine learning model that allows you to build up a knowledge database of content. So if you have business jargon or your own project codes, the system can learn that with you, with your information workers. And then again, with those models, we can automatically apply retention labels. So we're only keeping that information for as long as we need it to. And then we can decide either automatically delete that content, automatically go into disposition. So again, we can choose whether to delete that data, keep it for longer, and have a report of what has been deleted as well. Okay, so enough about data classifications for a second. We've talked about how do we do that discovery of data and things are turned on by default. In this same portal, we can do things like information governance. So this is where we can set up labels that your end users can manually apply if you want to, or we can automate that whole process. So that end user doesn't care which folder they put it into, whether they forget to manually classify or manually label that content. What we can do is go up here into label policies, and then we can automatically apply those labels based on that criteria that I just shown you. So let's pretend for a second that we're looking for some HR PII information. This is going to be an auto label policy. And these are the three categories we can get the system to go away and discover that content on. Whether it's based on sensitive information types, so remember they're categorized per region. So if I'm looking for some HR specific stuff, it might be under privacy. And then we can look at maybe UK Data Protection Act, which is going to pick up things like UK national insurance number, passport numbers, SWIFT codes. So have a look at these in your own environment. Equally, if we step back a second, we can also apply automatically content based on specific words, phrases, or properties. So if you're using any sort of metadata today or columns within SharePoint, or you want to pick up the fact that a specific item is labeled with a classification of confidential, and then automatically apply a retention policy on that data, we can do that through the metadata. So we have our keyword query language, so you can build up those more complex queries within here. So if you're looking for a specific SharePoint site, or you're looking for certain custodians that are creating content, we can build up those queries within this environment to automatically apply those retention labels and understand where that data lives. And like I said, the new kid on the block that's in preview at the moment is the trainable classifiers. So if I wanted the system to automatically apply a retention label on all of my contracts, I can go in here and select my contracts model. We also have some built-in templates as well, which are reused when we go into things like insider risk. So we can detect things like harassment or profanity or offensive language. We can also pick up things automatically that contain or look like CVs or is source code. So you can get the idea of where we're going with that. And then once we've selected a particular type of information that we want to find, where do we want to discover it? So we can look across the core repositories around Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, and 365 groups. See, that contains Teams data as well if you're using Microsoft Teams. And then we can choose our label. I'll do this very quickly because we're out of time. And then we can hit submit. So what it's going to do then is proactively, or retrospectively even, go through all of those online repositories, find that data, and then automatically classify or add a retention label with an associate retention policy around that. So it doesn't just work for retention, it also works for protecting that data around our information protection. Okay, going to do a quick time check for a second. Oh, we're looking okay. Another aspect that we have is around records management. So it works in a similar way, but now if you have retention policies that you already have built in your organization, then we can upload that file plan into the environment, and it'll automatically create not just the retention labels, but also the associated configuration for that. So you can see here that I've got a number of different records labels that I've set up. You can also see the metadata associated with those labels. So for example, this label that's marked as confidential, we can see its intended use, so the metadata for that label is for HR and it's for recruiting and hiring purposes. And when we go in and create a label, I'll show you how that's defined. So again, if we wanted to create a label specifically for HR, we can give it a description for users and admins. So this is, again, training on the go for your end users about what will happen if they choose that specific label. Then we can define the file plan descriptors. So this is metadata about who is going to use this label. So again, it's going to be human resources. You can configure these, by the way. We just give you some examples on here. Maybe recruit and hiring. We can also do sub-labels. We can do authority types as well. So this is going to be a regulatory thing. And we could also do citations if that's something else you need to meet. The top one that I commonly talk about is SEC rules for US companies. And if we go next, then this is where we can define how long we're going to keep that data for when that label gets set, either manually or automatically. So we could choose from a number of days, years, or months. This is fully customizable, by the way. And then what's going to happen after that 7-year period? We could also automatically delete this content. We could trigger a disposition review, so we can notify those information workers that they need to review those items and decide whether they're going to delete it or not. We can also mark things as records. So this is where we can make that item immutable. With a record, an end user can go in and change that label if they need to. But we understand there's lots of organizations out there that also needs to mandate that those original items are unchanged. As in, a record can be unlocked and locked, but we're keeping the major versions of that content. And versioning is turned on by default from on OneDrive for Business and SharePoint for major versions up to 500 revisions. But if we don't want those end users to make those changes to that regulatory record, then we could set this label to be a regulatory record. That means the end user can't make any changes to the document. They can't make a copy of it. They can't change any policies, as in they can't go in and keep this information for lesser years. They can only keep it for more. And then we actually lock down this policy for admins as well. So you're not able to unlock those policies. We do have a more stricter policy, which is to meet things like the SEC rules within the US. So we can lock down this entire policy, so not even Microsoft can make any changes on request for that to meet those individual citations. And then once we've defined our settings, we could say that maybe our paralegal team need to review this. So they'll get a notification about when items are due to be purged. And then we could go away and create that label. So pretty simple to do. We can also trigger retention labels or retention policies on events. So if you think that if someone's handed in their notice and we're putting that resignation date into the third-party HR system, we can take those signals from that HR system and we can trigger an event to automatically find that content for that individual, put an asset ID that's unique to that individual on that data, and then maybe we have a retention policy that just keeps that information for a year. So all of that, again, can provide automation around how long we're keeping information for and make sure that it's deleted and we're not keeping that content unnecessarily. All right, let's switch gears a second. I've got one slide I want to bring up here, which is, now we know about our data, we've governed that data, let's talk about protection for that data. So for data loss prevention, which we've had in Exchange, both server and online for many, many years now, we've expanded that out. So even if you put data within SharePoint or OneDrive, we're able to build those DLP policies to be able to protect that content. Whether it's detecting that information is trying to be shared outside of our organization, or maybe that information is just for HR, so you're creating a bubble around that data, and if it moves out that bubble, then we can prevent and detect that information as well. But we've also gone a step further. So even if you're using Microsoft Teams, it's using those core repositories of Exchange and SharePoint under the covers, so DLP policies will work for content. But we can also protect against conversations and chat. So if someone's chatting about something that's deemed as confidential, like credit card information or PII information, we can detect in near real time that that has happened and then redact that information from those recipients. We can allow that sender to either override that message if we wanted to, or provide a false positive. So we can feed back to admins to kind of fine tune that policy. There's protection around that chat information as well. What this means, like I said at the very start, that there's this balance between security and productivity. So we want to allow maybe guest access or guest users outside of our organization to be collaborative with, but we want to make sure that they only have access that they're entitled to, as in they can't see that content that is deemed as private or protected. So we can do that natively within the product. We can also do things at the endpoint level, which I'll show you in a moment. So built into Windows 10 is our Defender for Endpoint. I can't think of the word of the second, but built-in sensor, that's the word I was looking for. That is not just built in, but you can turn it on. So even if you're using a third-party antivirus solution today, we can work alongside that and just enable that part of Defender to allow things like Endpoint DLP capabilities. So even if the end user is touching on-premise files or they're creating potentially sensitive information on the desktop, we can detect that information as well and protect certain actions or just monitor actions that can feed into insider risk. We also have our CASB solution, which is our Cloud App Security. So even though you could use this against browser-based applications, both Microsoft and non-Microsoft, so if you're using your corporate repository as Box or Dropbox or using Salesforce or Workday, we can actually monitor those sessions and those files that are moved into those repositories. So if I move some potential sensitive information to Box, for example, we can view that over there and scan it, and then decide to put a classification label on it and encrypt it if we wanted to as well. Again, all of that information is audited. We can also do on-prem file shares, which I've already mentioned, using our Azure Information Protection Scanner. We've done quite a lot of work over that last couple of years. Now you can literally stand that up, that scanner on a VM, and you can have that up and running and reporting back to you within an hour or so. And you can scale those scanners out. And we can also, which is in preview, allow you to do a network scan of all your file shares or CIF shares or SMB shares to get an idea of what types of information you have, and then choose to either automatically classify and or protect that content on-prem. Also in public preview is the facility to reuse those DLP policies you've created up in the cloud and then apply that to on-prem files. And it can also report on the access control lists on those file servers and change those ACLs as well if you wanted to. And then lastly, over on the right-hand side, this is getting a massive slide, is our expansion into Azure, SQL on-prem, non-Microsoft loads. As in, if you're putting data within that content, we can reuse those sensitive information types and the data classifications that we've created within Office 365 to also protect that information outside of Office 365. Again, enough of the slides to show you how that works. So if we go down to, where should we start? Data loss prevention. This is where we can create what's called a unified policy. So all of those different modalities that I just talked about, we can create one policy that looks across the board across all those workloads. Again, you'll see this familiar template. So I can choose from the sensitive information types about what is the type of information I'm looking for. So let's pick something different a second. So if we're looking for some EU specific data for GDPR, we can do that. We can give it a name. Data is loading, okay. Love live demos. And then these are all the workloads I just talked about. So we can pick up the core repositories, which are Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive. We can also look at the chat and channel messages. So if people are chatting about something sensitive, we can protect against that. Devices, so at the endpoint level, detect that type of information being created or used there. And our Cloud App Security product. So you don't have to go into Cloud App Security to create the same policies anymore. You can do this one unified approach. And if we quickly scroll through the wizard here, this is where we can define what happens at those different workloads. So of course, if they're in Exchange or if they're using OneDrive or SharePoint, we can define whether that information is blocked outside the organization or provide a business justification. At the endpoint, these are the activities at the moment that we can discover. So things that are trying to go through an untrusted application, or some sensitive information is being copied to the clipboard or copied to USB. And then we have 3 different modes so we can audit. So just monitor that, don't tell the user. We can block that content, or we can allow the user to override that block with a business justification. And then we can also protect against those third-party applications I just talked about. So if you're using Box or G Suite today, then we can detect that type of information being used, and then even remove external users or remove a sharing link to that content automatically. So we don't have to do anything manually around that. And then the best way of turning these on is putting into monitoring mode. We need to maybe fine tune this DLP policy and see what it actually does before I break everyone working in the business. And then the next stage then is around giving a policy tip. So tell the user, hey, this is going to be blocked in the future. You can do this now, but at this date, we're going to enforce this policy. And the enforcement could be either blocking that content from being shared or even transparently encrypting that content out to your partners that you work with as well. And then lastly, around enforcing that policy. So making sure that we're enforcing that policy across the board. We have some best practices on all of these solutions I'm talking through today, by the way. So where do I get started around this? If you go to docs.microsoft, and I have at the end of this deck some kind of key takeaways, I've documented that in there and what those links are. We also see this in preview, any DLP policies that have been hit, and we rank these in order of severity. So you know at the very top that the most severe one is probably this one. They're all severe by the looks because this is a demo environment. And we get a high level view about what the activity is, who's triggered that DLP policy. We've also got a lightweight case management system in here as well. So me as the reviewer, I can start investigating this case. And then I can also go in and see the verbatim content that I showed you within the data classifications about what information was triggered, why did it trigger, what was the sensitive information type that was picked up. So if I go across to events here, and all of this information I'm showing you, although it's in the user interface, can be fed into an external SIEM product if you wanted to. So we have our own called Sentinel, So we can mash together all of these different signals, both from Office 365, both from Azure and Endpoint DLP, to get a clear timeline. And Sarah did show that from a Defender point of view about what the activities were and what triggered those individual events. So it gives you a flavor. Right then, let's show you what it looks like from an end user perspective. So if I go into Microsoft Teams, this works equally if I was in a Teams channel or a chat. I'm in a channel here. And if I try and drag and drop into, so from my desktop here, some credit card information, you'll see that at the very top, I've got a prefix here or appendix here around this Teams URL around MCAS.ms. That means that this session, for example, if I'm working from home and I don't have a corporate laptop, we can manage those web sessions at a very granular level. So when I try and drag or equally download some sensitive information, it's detecting that I'm not on a corporately owned device and I can't do those certain actions. And we can customize these messages as well. Hey, we've detected some credit card information and this is against policy. You're not allowed to do this. We can do the same things for those bubbles. So when you're creating a Microsoft team, you can demarcate what the sensitivity is for that team. So if it's marked as confidential, we can set up that conditional access control to say, right, if you're not on a corporate device, then you don't have access to that bubble to be able to view or even do anything with that content, regardless of whether it's got a classification label on that individual content or not. It's surrounding that entire bubble. So all that protection is built in. We can also do real-time malware scanning with this as well. So I've got my bad file up here. And if I drag and drop that in, or equally it works on downloading, we can malware scan that content and make sure that both our corporate systems and that person's endpoint is protected as well. And again, we can customize those messages the end user gets. If we go into something that we all love to hate, I guess, is email. Went through my thousands of emails last night. We have DLP capabilities that are real time. So if you're trying to share information directly from your personal OneDrive or your corporate OneDrive, or you're trying to do something in email, we give the end user these policy tips about what's going on. So if I just choose a fictitious email address that's outside my organization, you'll first notice that built into Outlook, this is Outlook on the web, but it works for the Outlook client as well, that the recipient is outside my organization. So we're telling the end user, hey, you're about to send this to someone else. They're not inside the organization. And if I go in and attach maybe this financial regulations document, by default, you'll notice these little clouds, these little kind of word icons, which means this is a sharing link. So I own, or I keep the content within my 365 tenant, but I'm sending a sharing link outside of my organization. That's a good way of sharing information because we can monitor that, we can redact access to that content, we can provide privileges, so whether they can edit or just read or not give them the facility to be able to download that attachment. But equally, we can add in that Microsoft information protection to make sure it's only for the intended recipients. So even if they had that Word document that's protected and they give it to someone else who's not entitled to that content, it's encrypted by default. It can be encrypted. It's not encrypted by default unless you set it up. It can be encrypted. So even if it's sat out on the internet somewhere, unless you have the appropriate rights, you won't be able to open that content. We can also monitor that individual item as well. We can redact access to that. We can expire access to that as well. If it's a contract that's only valid for 30 days, then we can set it for 30 days. And then after that, nobody else can read it. Also, just to finish this bit off, you also notice this new, it'd be really small on your screen, this next policy tip that people outside of my organization won't be able to read this. That's because our DLP policy is kicked in. So even if I ignore this and press send, they won't be able to read the actual attachment. We can set up the policies as well to revoke access to the send button in real time. So if we've detected this is classified, then and the user ignores it, they won't be able to hit send anyway. They'll just get a block message saying, we've detected the information within here. You can't send it due to policy. We could override it and send a copy instead. So we're attaching that physical file. But again, we have the same restrictions in place that will prevent me from actually sending that. If I just head over to my non-Microsoft product, which is Box, and I drag and drop my credit card information in there, which I'm allowed to do because it's a corporate repository, which you're entitled to do, we can monitor files within a Box or within G Suite or whatever you're going to use. But within our Cloud App Security product, we can monitor all of those activities and the files that are put there. So here's my credit card file. If I hover over these, we can see now automatically that content is protected through our information protection. So we've had classification label to that, which is persistent with it, and we've encrypted that content as well. So if you try and share that outside the organization directly from Box, those recipients might not have access to that. So we're protecting that data there. And we can also see there's a policy match that allows us to do that automation piece. So it's not just around dissimilar products apart from Microsoft, but also Microsoft products and the files that go against them as well. Again, I could spend a couple of hours just within this solution. It's just a ton to show you today. Okay, let's switch gears slightly. We're still on DLP. What I've got here is a machine that I've remoted onto. Things to note on here is I've got a number of different files that I've just placed on the desktop of this machine. So I've got this credit card file here that I think this is Sarah's credit card number. I'm only joking. It's fictitious numbers. And you'll see a couple of things happen while I'm talking. You'll see some dummy credit card information in there, but you'll also see the sensitivity labels, which are built into the Office suite, both the downloadable version and the web version as well. Sensitivity labels is built in here now, where it used to be an add-on before. Another thing you'll note is without me touching anything, we've automatically scanned the content and deemed it that it needs an appropriate sensitivity label. In this instance, it's given us as a policy tip to say your organization has automatically applied a retention label of confidential finance. And we've got a header that's been added here. And if I scroll down slightly, you can see the watermark that's been added. So that's the information protection doing that. If I just ignore that and say, right, I'm going to make this personal because I want to share this out anyway, and I go, maybe I don't want to explain what it is. My organization allows me to just say, it doesn't exist no more. We can take away all of that protection. So that's up to you as an organization. You can customize that as you wish. But if I ignore that then, and I'm a disgruntled employee, I can try and copy this credit card information. And what I'm going to do is I want it outside of a Microsoft product. So I'm just going to open up a text document. And I'm going to paste that in. And the goal of my live demos is I should get a pop-up saying that is restricted. I'll have to work out what I've done here. So what we're doing in the endpoint is we're scanning the information that's being used rather than relying on the classification. So my first little demo didn't work. I must have changed something since I was last in here. Let's try and print this. Oh, it's allowing me to do that today. Okay. Well, I've broken something in my demo, but what I'll do is just switch to some slides a second and show you what the user behavior is. What I've done there. Anyway, let's just jump to this point for a second. So what you can see here is, it's going to load. So this is the block message you should get. The end user, if they're allowed to, can give a business justification about why they need to allow that action. So like when I was trying to copy and paste the credit card information into a notepad file, that pop-up will come up and say, hey, you're not allowed to do that. I could give a business justification of why. And equally, I can see all of those activities being fed up into the activity log within Office 365 about what that end user has done and what they're trying to achieve here. So just like all the live demos, I've evidently broken something, but you get the idea of what this is doing. Equally, if I'm trying to move data onto a USB drive, which I think anyone does anymore, right? I can't remember the last time I used a USB drive, is we could prevent and block that type of activity. But equally, if that was allowed in your organization, then you could give a business justification about why you're moving that potentially sensitive information to USB, and make sure all of that is audited and logged and the end user knows that. So let's just switch gears again a second and talk about insider risk management. So now, armed with both knowing what your information is, knowing the activities, knowing the user behavior, insider risk is designed to do something that all organizations do today. But normally insider risk is done after the fact, as in if you're handing in your notice and you think, oh, there's lots of information that I've created that I want to take with me. I'm going to copy it to my personal Dropbox or my home device, and I'm going to take that with me. Or equally, it might be around communications, so targeted harassment or using obscene language, which isn't part of anyone's policies really. But being able to detect that from the information that you already have and be proactive to the fact that this has happened. And again, the system will surface that type of information up as part of a severity risk to say, look, this is the most severe stuff you need to look at first. And this is kind of lower stuff that you might want to just have a look at to see whether it's a case that you need to take forward. So what I've got on the screen is just some different use cases that information, that insider risk management could be used for. And this is important to a lot of parts of your organization. When I show this solution, the next question I normally get is, well, who are we going to give this product to? It all depends on what you want to monitor. It may be security. So if you're detecting that sensitive information or like classified information being moved around when it shouldn't be, maybe your SecOps teams needs to be alerted to the fact that that's happened. Or if it's around obscene language or targeted harassment, then HR and legal might be involved. So they might want to have access to this portal. And then around compliancy and privacy as well. So your compliance teams may also need access to that as well. Thanks, Nick. So again, let's jump into another bit of a demo. Actually, I'll show these slides first. So once we've picked up an activity that's been triggered either from an existing DLP policy, or we can take other signals from HR, or we can take signals from physical door access. So remember that time when we used to go to work, is I could use my badge to get into the building or go into secure areas within my building. We can take those signals now and also put those into insider risk management. So what I'm showing on the screen here, if I grab a pen, is this is an activity feed for an individual user. So by default, we obfuscate who that end user is to prevent bias against that person, because you might be reviewing your manager or your friend or a colleague. So we don't want to provide that type of information that might change your view about what these activities are. And then on this timeline, so we can see the bulk down here of activities happened in September. And the reason for this, a couple of reasons why, is we can see this resignation date has been set. So we're getting that date from our third-party HR system and then bring it into insider risk. But if you're a smart person, you're not going to hand in your notice and then download of information. You're probably going to do that months in advance or days in advance before you even think about telling anyone you're going to leave. So now we give you this timeline of events prior to these sort of milestones here about what activities have happened in the past. So we can see these different colored orbs or balls. We can also see the legend down the bottom here. So we can see files being copied. We can also see things like offensive language or emails being sent out. And we can move these little markers. So you'll see here in this November, this is the area that we're looking at right now. And if we hover over these different colored icons, we can see the files have been copied to USB. That's where we're using the insider risk. We're using the Endpoint DLP, to get that information. We can see that 2,000 files were copied, 14 of which contain credit card information, and there was about 200 files that were classified as confidential. So that's pretty severe. And the system has automatically provided us a severity score. So it's given this particular user activity a 91 out of 100, so it's pretty bad. The next thing we could do is to investigate this further is we could click on the Activity Explorer here. We can equally use these hyperlinks in the bottom. If we switch over to the Activity Explorer, we can see all of those files that were copied to USB. Now, these files need to reside in Office 365 in order for us to see it. So if they were created at endpoint, we wouldn't. But if we have the appropriate rights, we can click on these individual items, just like this PowerPoint file here, and get a preview about what that content was. And we can see right down the bottom that this was classified. We've got a footer here in red that was marked as highly confidential. And this is definitely something that shouldn't be copied in our organization to a USB drive. So the next thing I could do is I can open up a new investigation, and I can decide whether I'm going to give that to my eDiscovery team to investigate further, or my legal department to take action with that. But if it was something unintentional, then I can also template an anonymous email notice to that individual saying, hey, maybe you need to read our business of conduct again. And then we could decide to close that case. We can also bring in external contributors into this. And quite recently, we brought in the capability to add in automation. So once we've detected these different alerts happening, we could decide to create an automation policy that notifies that end user's manager. And then they can decide whether that they want to take action further, or maybe have a side conversation with that person about what they're trying to achieve. We could add automation for alerts to your SecOps team, or create a DLP rule, or add them into a DLP rule. So we can do lots of things around there using our Power Automate functionality. And we brought in the capability of automatically creating a team in Microsoft Teams. So now those external contributors to this case have a place where we can discuss securely about the different activities that end user has done and what we're going to do about that going forward. Right, in the next kind of 7 minutes that I have, I wanted to talk about the kind of reactive approach, the things after the fact that they happened, whether you're running it is subject request or freedom of information request, or you're running an internal case based off an insider risk case. Then we have two solutions within our arsenal here that go hand in hand. One is advanced eDiscovery. So the advantages of using that is basically using machine learning to cull the information, the data set that you're bringing back. If you think about how many exact duplicates or how many near duplicates you have, being able to get the system to automatically identify what those are. So we're just reviewing the information that we need. We've enhanced filters within that so we can discover themes of a data set. And we use that when individuals are using like coded conversations. And the example that we always use within another company was they were using different Star Wars characters and different sized fruits to say who the person was receiving the money. So Darth Vader was receiving the money, and it was grapefruit size, and that was the size of the money that they were taking outside of their organization. And unless you knew, you wouldn't necessarily know those were the terms that you should be searching for to bring back information for that case or that data set. So we can use that themes analysis, that predictive coding, to find out what is being said and how many hits are being said within that data set. And then we can fine tune what we're searching for. We can also do things like filtering and tagging and redaction. They're built into the review tools as well. Again, negating the need to be able, say that again, negating the need to export data unnecessarily. Remember, if you're exporting data out through eDiscovery, it's your corporate data you're moving outside of that bubble. So we want to reduce the amount of tools and things that you're using in order to do that facility. And then over on the right-hand side, advanced audit, which I've already talked about, but around building up a timeline of those events. eDiscovery gives you the content, but doesn't give you the activity about what happened in that particular time frame. An advanced audit allows you to keep retention of those logs up to a year. We just announced as well that you can keep up to 10 years of content now within the platform. Because remember, when you do an eDiscovery case, it wasn't yesterday, it's probably 6 months or a year ago. So having that timeline of events is really good. We can also look at high value events as well. So things are happening in teams, more granular capabilities within there, and things like SharePoint searches. So we can see if somebody was trying to search for something that they should know about, like a code name, and maybe the access controls weren't set up properly for whatever reason, and then they access that potentially confidential sensitive information. So we can build up a timeline of that. Just to show you what that redaction things looks like. 4 minutes. eDiscovery in 4 minutes. That'll be interesting. Is if we jump over to, I thought I already had it open. Advanced eDiscovery. We need to jump back to this. Advanced eDiscovery allows us to do threaded conversations, whether it's within Microsoft Teams or whether they're emails. So we can give you the emails. So when you're chatting with the Microsoft Teams, they create individual emails in Exchange. We can thread those together. So if you're looking for a specific keyword, we can give you both the pre and post conversation in context of what you searched for. So to show you very quickly the review process within Advanced eDiscovery is we can see items within here that we can preview in our native viewers. So if it's a Word document or an Excel document, we can view that in its entirety. And also you'll see these little Teams icons. So these are threaded conversations. If I change the real estate here, of what was in context to what I searched for. And you'll also notice that we can see documents are being sent within here as well. We can see Giphies and likes. We can put this in a different readable format, so we can have it in a text view because some files are just easier to review in text. And we can also have this annotation view as well. So you can see on this particular file, I've redacted some of the information. Because I'm in control of it, I can make this opaque and I can see through it. I can choose between different colors, and we can do our area of redaction. So maybe this isn't appropriate to send out as part of that DSR or that freedom of information case. And we can redact and then burn those redactions into PDF as part of our export process. Like I said, over on the right-hand side, depending whether I've got any exact duplicates or near duplicates, these will light up and tell me how many are in there. So if there's 10,000 items of the same thing, great. I know there's 10,000 items, but I just want to be able to review one of those. Moving swiftly forward, the last bit I wanted to talk about was data connectors. So you get quite a lot of storage capabilities when you come to Office 365, both for Exchange, OneDrive for Business, and for SharePoint. Now we allow you to ingest non-Microsoft data into the platform. And back at Ignite, we announced some more connectors from 2 different partners of ours, and we also have some Microsoft-centric, Microsoft-built connectors to be able to ingest things like Slack or Zoom or social media feeds like Facebook or Twitter into your environment. And the reason why you might want to do that is you can utilize the compliance capabilities that we give you in the platform. So things like legal hold or eDiscovery, we can make that as part of the case. Inside of Risk Management, we can bring that information up. So if you're having a chat around Slack that is deemed as sensitive, we can surface that with inside of Risk Management. And audit logs, so we can see all of that. And the way that works from a techie point of view, if we take Teams, for example, that information is stored within Exchange or SharePoint, but we can utilize all of the compliance capabilities that we have over on the right-hand side to be able to look at that information. But if we're bringing in third-party information, we can ingest that into Exchange and again, use those same tools to be able to do it. We also had some other announcements I'll run through very quickly around API access for your own data loss prevention policies. You can customize that and develop that need. eDiscovery APIs to be able to automate that entire process rather than going through the user interface, making it repeatable and reliable, and being able to export Teams data out of our environment if you want to ingest that into a third-party review tool. And then lastly, around the data connectors. So bringing in third-party data into Exchange to utilize those features. And we can build in Power Automate flows and playbooks to automate these processes from things like Insider Risk Management and Communication Compliance as well. That's all we got time for today. Thanks very much for listening.